Entrepreneurship is just the overwhelming belief in yourself. Hi guys, today's episode is a little different from our usual interviews, and I have been procrastinating this one for a while. Today, I'm doing a solo episode. And my procrastination is not to say that I'm not excited about this or that I don't want to do it. I think it's just more of like an imposter syndrome mental block situation. But first, just let me say thank you so much for listening to this episode. And secondly, let this be your sign that your dreams are worth pursuing, even if no one is paying attention, or even if you feel imposter syndrome and you don't think that you're worth it. Let this be your sign. You are. Just do the thing. So with that out of the way, what I want to talk to you guys about today is first, I want to give you some background on my journey starting the podcast. How did I get here? What is the ultimate dream or vision? That way you guys get a better idea as to why I'm here every week and what I'm working towards. I also want to chat about how I actually got the podcast off the ground and how I maintain it to this day. Because, I always want to leave you guys with some tangible takeaways. So that way you can pursue your own dreams, whether that be starting a podcast or something else entirely. I'm sure you'll find something out of this podcast episode to apply to your own situations. So let's start with how and why I started this podcast. And in order to answer that question, we got to go back to a little bit over 1 year ago. So I was living in China for 3 years and I was doing project management there. And then when my project ended, I wanted to come back to the US and move to San Francisco to be closer to my family. So when I moved to San Francisco, I was like, well, I'll get a tech job because that's what everybody in San Francisco does. And long story short, I was applying to jobs left and right and it just wasn't working. And I didn't know why. And I couldn't understand what I was doing wrong because I was doing all the things. And eventually what I realized is that I should be looking at this time as an opportunity from the universe to figure out really what I wanted to do in my life. And it took a lot of sitting down and asking myself some honest questions. It required a lot of introspection and a lot of dreaming, which was very hard for me because I've always been a planner. Ever since I was in high school, I'd had my whole life planned out. And then when things don't work out, I was like, what the fuck do I do now? So it was a challenging exercise, but one that was most certainly worth it because it made me really acknowledge what I wanted. And when you acknowledge what you want, then you're sort of left with I kind of have to go and pursue it. So I always knew that I wanted to be my own boss. Truly the thought of dedicating the rest of my life to executing somebody else's vision every day was just not something that I could get behind. And I was like, okay, fine, you're right. And now I really have to do something about it. So I was like, okay, well, what do I want to build? What kind of business do I want to have? I've never been a product girly. I've never had this great idea of some product or service that I wanted to create. I'm not a tech founder, I'm not even a skincare brand person, whatever. I've never had a product idea that I wanted to build. So last year I was like, well, what can I do? And I was like, well, I love writing and I love social media. So I put them together and I launched the blog, which was Mimir. Mind you, this is not my first or second attempt at starting a blog. It's probably more accurately my third or fourth attempt at starting a blog. But the purpose of the blog was to interview founders to give other aspiring entrepreneurs and myself the tools they need to build their dream lives, whatever that looks like. So as you guys know, it's not really a different concept from what the podcast is today. But how I went from blogging to the podcast situation is at first I was very hesitant to start a podcast. I was like, everyone does podcasts. I want to be different, so I'm going to just do the blogging. And that worked for a while until I started to really dread the writing process. And this was something that was quite shocking to me because I've always loved to write. And I figured, oh, that's something that I could do for the rest of my life. But what was frustrating me about the writing process was that my interviews were so excellent. There was so much great stuff happening in the interviews that it just simply couldn't fit into an article because of the structural challenges of writing. So eventually I thought to myself, either I give up and I just stop the blog because I hate the writing process, or I just transition into a podcast. And so then that's when I decided to start podcasting and posting the interviews for you guys instead of just writing them out. So before I jump into how I actually transitioned into the podcast, how I built the blog, I want to talk to you guys a little bit about what my ultimate dream is with the podcast. I think aside from the obvious, which is that I would love for this to become my full-time job, I have this crazy idea where I just want to gather up all the amazing creators and businesses out there that are really helping people in some way, shape, or form, and bring them under like one power network so we can just be this awesome collective of people helping humanity. And I have no idea what that is going to look like. Like maybe that's a podcast production company, or maybe it's a media network, who knows? But really that's my dream at the end of the day, is to create this like giant cohort of people that are actually doing real things to help people like today. So that's a great story and all. And if you're listening and you're like, I want to do that, but I don't know how. So let's get super granular on exactly how I built the blog, and then how I transitioned the blog to a podcast, because I think there's some like really good nuggets in here. If you're an entrepreneur and you're like, I have an idea, but I don't know how to build it. Or if you currently have an idea and you're like, it's not working and I need to pivot, then I think this hopefully should help you guys figure it out, help you create your own roadmap. First step, if you're an entrepreneur with an idea, or if you have an idea and you think it's a great idea, but you haven't done this yet, you're going to learn something from this. So make a pitch deck. If you're in tech, or if you're looking to get investors, then you know what a pitch deck is. If you don't know what a pitch deck is, essentially it's just a way or a tool to help you flesh out the really important questions of starting a business. So some of those really important questions is what your business is, and what need is it serving, and whose need is it serving. So really what you're fleshing out more simply than that is, who is your target audience? What need do they have? And how are you filling that need with your business? If you have an idea, but you don't have anybody that it's servicing, then you don't really have a business. You just like have a hobby, because I don't want to say that you're not going to make money from it, because it's not necessarily, that is kind of what makes a business. Like, if you're not making money from your business, you just have a hobby. Second of all, the nice thing about the pitch deck is it really helps you get a good understanding of what your business is and what it does and how it's going to function. So you have to answer all of the sort of like step one questions in this, like, what are your channels? Are you on social media? Like, how are you getting the word out to people about your business? What are the intricacies of your business? How exactly are you servicing this need? And also, like, is there even a need for this? Like, is your market there and available? These are super important questions that truly, for me at least, because I was building this by myself, I didn't really have like a co-founder to bounce these ideas off of. So by creating a pitch deck, I was able to call my dad and be like, hey, I just want to run this idea by you. And then it gives him a clear idea of what the business idea is. So then that way you can get feedback, and feedback is incredibly important. So if you are not in a place that you are ready to be receiving feedback, then you need more work, because you have to let go of the ego. You have to get feedback. Otherwise, your biggest challenge that you will be confronted by is that you don't know what you don't know, and you don't know how to ask questions about shit that you don't know about. Like, that's always been my biggest challenge, is I don't know what I don't know. And so you have to ask other people and tell people, but tell the right people. And I'll talk about this, I think, a little bit later, about surrounding yourself with the right group of people, because you don't want to submit your pitch deck or share your pitch deck early with somebody in your life who's like a negative Nancy, who is not going to be willing to hear you out, and who's just going to come to you with unproductive responses and not necessarily constructive ones. So anyway, after I did the pitch deck, I started with my website, because for me, that was the easiest sort of like thing to tick off. And also everything funneled out from there, right? So when I was doing the blog, any of my call to actions on social media would be to go to the blog and read the article, share the article, blah, 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 blah. So that's why I started with the website. I hired a web designer for this, because I didn't want to spend the time or energy developing this through code and like trying to learn WordPress and all the other shit that comes with building a website. It was expensive, I will admit to you. And I'm not exactly sure that I would do it again. I might just like switch it up, especially now that I've transitioned to a podcast. My website really isn't serving my purpose. So I'm in the process of trying to figure out how I want to update and change it to reflect sort of our current path and vision. But long story short, what I'm trying to tell you is to do your own research. starting with the pitch deck really helps you to understand exactly what your business is trying to accomplish. And then you can figure out from there where sort of your next step should be, because that should be a part of your pitch deck, is like at the end, it should be like, what are the next steps? So do your own research, really think about it, find what works for you, and then just do that. So for me at the time, I was hiring a web designer, now different things, but just start with the first right thing for your business. Transitioning to a podcast was actually a lot easier than I thought it was going to be. The first thing that I did was reach out to a friend of mine who I actually interviewed for the blog. She has a successful podcast called The Real Real. Her name is Natalie Barbu. Shout out to Natalie. She was fantastic. She is a super busy founder, and she was kind enough to take 15 minutes out of her day to answer my questions about how to start and launch a podcast successfully. So she sort of really gave me like a clear roadmap on the transition. And because I had already put in a ton of work and time on setting a strong foundation for the blog, making the transition was actually quite simple. Also, I did a series on TikTok about starting the podcast. So if you guys want to go check that out, just go to Hi Maddie Kelly on TikTok and you can see sort of like a little bit more granular about like all the things that I did to figuring out how I was going to edit the audio and like all the other stuff about really starting a podcast. If you guys have questions about that, just let me know in the reviews or in the comments and I'll answer them for you. But the hot tip for this section of the podcast is to lean on your friends. Make connections, because they are going to be your greatest asset in this life. Anything that you want to start or do, like reach out to people who have either done it before or who are knowledgeable in that space and can maybe point you to somebody who has done it before, because the best way that you can learn is through other people's experiences. And there's just honestly so much information online that sometimes it's hard to filter and find the right information. And for me personally, it's just a lot easier to start with somebody who's done this before, and then they can sort of give you the Cliff Notes version of whatever research you'll find on Google. And they can point you to other people. And it just really helps, because you never know when you're going to need help. And making connections is just the best way that you can sort of like level up in whatever area of business you're trying to break into or grow in. So if honestly, this could be a whole other solo episode on how to make connections, how to overcome the cringe or the fear behind it. So let me know in the reviews or the comments if you guys wanted me to do another solo episode specifically on networking. So once I transitioned and got the podcast off the ground, which was in about November, a lot of the questions that I get today are, how do I maintain it? Like if you guys don't know this, work a 9 to 5 in tech. And a lot of people are like, how do you have a full-time job and also do the podcast and also go to the gym every day? Like, okay, well, that's an exaggeration. I go to the gym every day. I go to the gym like 4 times a week. But anyway, the question remains, like, how do I figure out how to like time manage appropriately? And I should caveat everything that I'm about to say with the fact that like I've always been like a type A, super organized individual. So for me, that's sort of like where my brain leads. So it's not super hard. However, I will say that finding the right project management situation that works for you is critical. Quick sip here. I have tried everything under the sun in terms of project management. I used to be like a physical planner girly. And if you're a physical planner girly, I highly recommend either Lauren Bostick's planner or Nissan Rader's Mind Your Business planner. Those two I really, really liked. But recently I've transitioned to a digital solution, which if you guys are listeners of the podcast, you've probably heard me talk about Notion before. And I'll link out Notion in the show notes if you want to give it a try. But basically, Notion is a wonderful project management software for a couple of reasons for me. It's all cloud-based. So let's say, for example, I'm on a hot girl walk and I have an idea. I can pull up my Notion on my app on my iPhone and write it down. Everything is incredibly organized in there. I have project timelines that tell me when everything's due. And it's just very simple, it's clear, and it's effective. And I could do a whole other episode about how I set up my Notion. But if you guys want to know, I bought a template from Grace Beverly, who is a super successful founder who I'm low-key obsessed with. She's incredibly smart and a really cool person. But one of her businesses is this thing called the productivity movement, the productivity moment. I think it's the productivity movement. But she sells a Notion template that just really works with my brain. Like it's perfect for me. So that's what I use. It's easy for me to stay on top of because it works for me. Like the solution makes sense for my brain. It's how I think. Additionally, I think it's easy for me to stay on top of the podcast because I love it. Like simply enough, like I love podcasting. I really enjoy it. I would probably podcast for the rest of my life if I never got paid for it, if I never got any more followers, if I just honestly, if nobody even listened, I'd probably still post podcasts to this day. I love podcasting because I learn something from every new conversation that I have. And my greatest hope is that you guys learn something too. Like, that's really what I'm in it for, is to like hope that you guys learn something. So anyway, the main takeaway that I want you to hear from this is that you have to try everything. Like, and I don't just mean trying different project management softwares to stay on top of your shit every day. I mean this as like a life metaphor. Like, try everything. Pursue everything that you feel even 1 ounce of passion for with vigor, because that's really like what life is about. That's how you learn. It's how you grow. And like, we were put on this planet for a reason. And newsflash, it's not to just like wake up, go to work until you die. No, like, you have a reason that you're here and something that you're supposed to be doing. And the way that you find it is through pursuing the things that make you freaking excited. Because one day, and this is what happened to me, is that you will stumble upon the thing that feels easy and fun. And it's not to say that there won't be challenges, because there will always be challenges, and life isn't fun without challenges because you're not growing. But it's basically like how I would describe the sort of like when you know moment is that it feels like the puzzle piece is like slotting into place correctly. And I've had things in my life, like when I published my poetry book, I was like, goodbye, everybody. I'm going to be a writer. Like, see you later. I'm going to go live my fantasy and like move to the coast and like write books for the rest of my life. But when I really think about it, like, I was trying to like force that puzzle piece. Like, I needed to write that book for some cathartic reasons. But I don't think that was my life path. Like, I love writing, but as we discovered, it's not what I meant to do for the rest of my life. So the only way you're going to find your thing is if you try everything that feels exciting to you. And a lot of people will tell you to not follow your passion because not everything that you're passionate about is what you're supposed to do to make money. And I fully agree with that. I think like I discovered that through writing. Anyway, I digress. Like, the only way you're going to figure your shit out is if you just try everything. And podcasting is that for me, at least right now. And I personally place a lot of pressure on myself that everything I do has to be successful. You know, that's how I was raised. But I've experienced a lot of quote unquote failure in my life. And for the first time, I'm actually not worried about failing again. Like, failure is just how you learn stuff. I'm starting to really understand that failure is frankly invaluable lessons. Like, there's a shit ton you can learn from failing. So maybe we shouldn't call it failure. I don't know, whatever you want to call it, but essentially you're just always learning. And the worst case scenario is never really that bad when you think about it. Really, it's actually like the worst case scenario, if you think about it, is if you think failing is the worst case scenario, it's really not that big of a deal, because what you're getting out of that is great learning information. So you're like, okay, well, that didn't work. So now I can try something else or try it again and not make the same mistakes. So don't be afraid to try everything because you're afraid to fail at it. I think trying everything and failing is a beautiful part of life. It's how we give ourselves grace. It's how we gain confidence and credibility in ourselves. And I hope that you can take out of this episode not to be worried about it. Just try everything. The only thing you can do is your best. So when you want to try something, fucking go for it. Try it as hard as you possibly can. Give it 112% of yourself. And if it doesn't work out, learn from it. Pick yourself back up, cry about it if you want to. I do. And then try again, because that's just part of life. So now that I've kind of talked about like how I started the podcast, why I started the podcast, where I'm going with the podcast, and how I maintain it every day, I want to wrap up this solo episode by saying that one of the most important things about the entrepreneurial process, whether you're in the idea stage or whether you're already in it and maybe you're looking to transition or you're looking to scale, is that you have to surround yourself with the right people. Particularly if you're in the idea phase. When I was giving my pitch deck to family and friends and telling them about my idea, I had people who are supposed to be your greatest champions or my greatest champions look me dead in the face and tell me that I just wasn't cut out for it, that I don't have enough experience to make this work, and that it's just not going to happen. And when I heard that, it was obviously a devastating blow, but I'm not the kind of person to sit back and just be like, well, they're right. No, absolutely not. I'm going to use that as fuel, and not as fuel to say like, oh, I'm going to prove you wrong someday. No, it's more about proving to myself that I was right. Like, when I heard that, I wrote myself a little note that says, like, remember what was said. So every time I started to feel down on myself, or every time I started to wonder what I was doing or why I was putting in all this effort, like, what was it all for? It's all really for me at the end of the day, to prove to myself that I was right. And so with that, I think it's important to note that I also have people who are incredibly supportive, who are my cheerleaders. And like my dad, I talked about it with you guys earlier. You know, he was the one who listened to my pitch deck, who gave constructive feedback, who was really like with me in it and willing to help me. And that is priceless in these kinds of moments. An idea is so fragile and it's so new. And if you don't have the right people who are in your corner willing to support you and listen, those great ideas could just go out the window. And so if somebody's listening to this podcast right now and they're like, I don't have anybody that I feel comfortable sharing this idea with, email me, DM me. I don't care. If you're like, hey, I listened to your solo episode and I have this idea and I don't feel like I have anybody who I'm comfortable enough with sharing this with, like, I would be willing to listen. I will send you my calendar link and you can pitch me in 15 minutes and we can chat about it. And like, I would be more than happy to be somebody's support system right now, because there are so many great ideas out there and there are so many amazing people that have something that they want to leave their mark on this planet with, that's an impactful and helpful idea. And I don't want to see that get broken just because some asshole told you that you couldn't do it. So this is to say, to surround yourself with people who are incredibly supportive. And I think what's important to note is that there will always be different people in your life for different things. You will have your going out people that are fun to party with, but they are not the same people that you want to talk business with. They are not the people that you go to the gym with. And you have your gym people who are like, this person helps me stay healthy and accountable. And like, I tend to find that those people are also the people that I want to have like legit conversations with. Like, there are always different people in your life for different things. And you have to start like knowing when to play each card and at what time. So if you're in the idea phase and you're looking for somebody to be supportive of your potential entrepreneurial venture, then think strategically about who you're going to talk to about it, because you're going to have naysayers in your life and you're going to have cheerleaders, and you're going to pick which one is the right person for each moment in time. I have people like that in my life. They're the ones who listen and give me a hug and then give me a nudge to keep going because they believe in me. And that gives me the confidence to get back on my feet and believe in myself again. Frankly, entrepreneurship is just the overwhelming belief in yourself. You are fighting against the grain because you know that you can do what everyone says you can't. Whether that's disrupting an industry, creating some new technology, becoming an author, a content creator, or starting a plumbing business. Like, whatever it is, what binds us all together is that we have something that nobody else does. We have this insane belief in ourselves above all other external factors that tell us we shouldn't. Like, investors will tell you that your idea is crazy. Family will tell you your idea is crazy. Friends will tell you that you're crazy for wanting to do something different. But at the end of the day, what's going to get you to where you want to go is yourself. And you have to be like low-key delusional and say that everybody else is wrong and that like you know what you're capable of and that you could go out there and you could kill it. I honestly think that that's kind of the perfect place to close the solo episode, because let's end it on an inspo note. So if that sounds like who you are in this moment of time, then make sure you follow the podcast, because I've got a lot more where that comes from every single Monday. And if you guys enjoyed the solo episode and you want more, I would love to hear from you guys in the reviews or on my Instagram at Mimir the podcast. Send me a message. Tell me what you want to hear in the solo episodes. If you have questions, if you want to pitch me your idea to get some feedback, hit me up. Honestly, even if nobody comments, I'm still going to keep doing the solo episodes because frankly, I had a really fun time doing it. And that's what this is all about anyways, having fun. So bye. I will see you guys next week. I hope you enjoyed the episode and thank you for listening.